inspiration for Media Wiz came from discovering the whole caustic critic, angry reviewer subgenre back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. That was what I was really into in middle school. You know, reviewers like Angry Video Game Nerd, Nostalgia Critic, and the like from Channel Awesome and so forth. And even though I was starting to lose interest in a lot of those kind of creators by 2016, I still managed to keep up with a bunch of reviewers who I actually watched before I got into those people specifically. And some of these people I've not only done videos with, but I've also actually become pretty friendly with as well. People like the Cartoon Hero, the Hardcore Kid, the Media Hunter, Zenith Will Rule, Rowdy, Nordy, Spongy, a lot of people from Mr. Coat and Friends, Master Adam, Nutcase Reviews, and especially a lot of my fellow reviewers over at Toxic Dragonfly Productions. People like Critical Kid, Nostalgia Kid. A lot of us were clearly inspired by those reviewers from back in the day, but I feel like we took inspiration from that and we eventually worked our own spin on it. Originally, Media Wiz was actually going to be called Media Wiz Kid, but I saw like, okay, we already got Critical Kid, Nostalgia Kid. Like, I'm not gonna do that, so instead I just called him Media Wiz. Because I thought the whole idea of a review show that had a bunch of different media, it wasn't just movies and shows or video games or whatever. It was going to be a kind of a variety show. Every episode was going to be about a different subject entirely. You know? In terms of humor, I think a lot of us have the same kind of sense of humor. A lot of the kind of stuff we reference typically comes from like Mel Brooks movies like Spaceballs or Monty Python, whether it's their show or their movies. Mystery Science Theater is obviously a huge inspiration. When it comes to Media Wiz nowadays, I really try to pull back in terms of the storyline stuff. I mean, there's a couple exceptions, like the crossover videos and like the fanboy fangirl videos where the fanboys show up to help Media Wiz review things. But like, there are so many people who do a way better job of this. But when I first started, I was trying way too hard to do that kind of, you know, angry reviewer storyline based stuff, even down to the whole, oh, I'm an evil Media Wiz from an alternate universe and I'm going to interrupt the review so we can have an epic fight scene for 5 minutes. I try to do a lot less of that nowadays, with Media Wiz specifically. Like I said, there are some people who can do that kind of thing. They can pull it off really well. And whenever I look back on some of my older things, like when I had the Pop Culture Wiz, he's the evil Media Wiz from an alternate reality and stuff like that, I don't think it really holds up. But I mean, I feel like everybody says that about some of their older content anyways, but you know, it's a learning experience. I think last thing to say about Media Wiz are the two sidekick characters, that being Future Wiz and 30s Man. 30s Man was pretty obviously like inspired by reviewer characters who were supposed to be like exaggerations of characters from different decades. Like you have 90s Kid and 80s Dan. And when I was first coming up with Media Wiz, one thing I was thinking about doing was reviewing old black and white movies. Because growing up, I used to watch a lot of Three Stooges, and I just came up with this character who was like, oh, he's 30s Man. You know, I had the image in my head of like, okay, flat cap, button-up shirt, suit jacket that matched, and you know, talks really fast, and you gotta say like C, and you gotta call people Kid and Mac. And as for Future Wiz, every review show back then that had an extensive cast of characters, more often than not, they usually had the obligatory scientist character. Like the one that comes to mind is Dr. Insano. So that was kind of an inspiration for that. But also, looking back on Cartoon Heroes videos, there was one character who I felt was really an inspiration for Future Wiz's like personality and his backstory. The Future Wiz is supposed to be Media Wiz from an alternate future who originally came back to destroy him, but then eventually they became friends. Cartoon Hero had a character like pretty much just like that, and I feel like that was a huge inspiration. It was the character of number 6, who was supposed to be a clone of the Cartoon Hero from the future, who was originally sent to destroy him, but then they eventually started working together. That was definitely a big inspiration. Blockbuster show originally started as me and my friends wanting to do a sketch comedy show about 3 guys that worked in a video store. And it would alternate between sketches where they interact with dumb customers and them parodying the movies that were in the store. Obviously, one of the big inspirations was Be Kind Rewind, and another one was those old Blockbuster sketches they had on, I forget if it was All That or The Amanda Show, but it was definitely one of those. It had Drake and Josh and Amanda Bynes, and they would work at like this knockoff Blockbuster store, and they would do parodies of the movies, and then they would sell them back to the customers. And the whole thing with the angry customers, that was definitely inspired by Blockbuster Critic's old show, Guidelines to Being a Customer, where he would recount stories about stupid customers that came into a store, and they usually followed like general themes like people not knowing what they wanted, or stupid stories involving annoying kids coming into the store, stuff like that. So those were definitely like the big three inspirations for the first 2 or 3 years of Blockbuster Show. But then eventually we wanted to kind of move past that, and the original idea was it was going to be like a variety show in the sense that it would be more personable, like it would be less scripted stuff like Media Wiz, but it was going to be more like, okay, we're going to talk about movies, but we're going to do it unscripted. We're just going to do it like all improv and on the fly. In terms of the way the Blockbuster videos are structured now, I feel like the whole like unscripted, loosey-goosey kind of vibe that people do with videos, it's a lot more common these days. Like a bunch of people who used to be a part of Channel Awesome do that now, like Movie Nights does that. The two big examples of non-CA related people who do that I can think of, who are also pretty big in the like internet movie critic scene, are obviously Red Letter Media and Double Toasted, or even like Spill.com when they originally had that site. Whereas reviewers during the Channel Awesome or AVGN days obviously flourished by doing like sketch-based stuff and scripted stuff and more character-oriented stuff. It feels like Red Letter Media and like Spill.com and Double Toasted, those kind of reviewers were a lot more based around discussion, and while they did play characters to an extent, like they would play exaggerated versions of themselves, like a lot of internet reviewers tend to do, obviously, their humor was a lot less scripted, and it was a lot more based around having roundtable style discussions. I feel like the biggest inspiration for Blockbuster Show in its current form is the YouTube channel Worst Movies On. For a while they were Worst Movies on Netflix, and then they alternated to Worst Movies on YouTube. Now they're just Worst Movies On. I've been watching these guys ever since like 2011, and I always found them really funny. It's a YouTube channel hosted by two guys, Bird and Gutter. When me and my friends were first doing Blockbuster Show, this was like episode 5, I think. Like we just asked them on Facebook, like, hey, would you be interested in doing a cameo for us? And they did it. And ever since then, like, we've just been following each other back and forth, and sometimes we end up doing a lot of the same movies. Like, I know they talked about Crazy Fat Ethel 2, and I did that for Blockbuster Show. We both did videos on Love on a Leash, and there's a couple of other movies that, like, kind of fall into the general category of movies that we talk about. Like, sometimes you have really low-budget movies, sometimes you have movies that are basically flops. Like, they have big budgets and they have like major stars in them, or they're put out by major studios, but you probably don't remember them because they were not very good. Last thing to say about Blockbuster Show is I really wanted Adam Sykes to be a different character for Media Wiz. So there had to be a couple of things to differentiate that. So one was the glasses. Media Wiz doesn't wear glasses, but Adam Sykes does. It's very Clark Kent and Superman, I guess you could say. But there's a bunch of other differences. Like, I think whenever I play Adam, I try to make him more cynical. I try to play into the whole like angry cinephile, like, movie buff kind of person that talks about bad movies online. Media Wiz, I think, is just a little bit more forgiving. I think they're both equally snarky, but I think Adam is a lot less forgiving. And there's a bunch of other differences. Like, Media Wiz is more into 90s and 2000s animation, and Adam is more into like anime and Japanese culture, and so there's supposed to be like a lot of key differences that make Media Wiz and Adam different from one another. Chris T. Ian originally started off as a very loose parody of The Amazing Atheist, and you can tell from the name, Captivating Christian, Amazing Atheist. And some of the earliest videos of Chris were supposed to be parodies of stuff that he had done. Like, there were videos of him asking people to buy his books, so I did a video where Chris made really low-effort comics and was begging people to buy them. And there's a video where it's implied that Chris had sex with a pineapple, and that's obviously a parody of the infamous banana video. And ever since then, as the more Chris videos I did, I feel like Chris eventually kind of morphed into his own thing. And just like with Blockbuster Show, when I started Chris, it had a much different feel. It was a lot more centered on like recent events, and I felt like over time, I was starting to like enjoy doing videos like that a lot less. And so that's why I temporarily stopped doing Chris videos, but then eventually I decided to come back when I had a better idea for what I wanted to do with the character going forward. It was because a lot of my fellow content creators were saying, oh, what you should do is you should do like Christian media reviews as Chris. So review Christian shows and Christian movies and stuff like that. And while there is a fair amount of that, I also found a number of other things that I like talking about. The personality of Chris, and especially the voice, it comes from the Rucka Rucka Ali song, Let's Go Jesus, which is a parody of Blah 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 by Kesha featuring 303. And in the song, Rucka uses his voice. He typically uses this in a couple of different songs, but it's basically his stereotypical white guy voice. A bunch of comedians have obviously done that for years, like Dave Chappelle has done it, Richard Pryor has done it. But Rucka used it in that song, and like it basically encompassed the character of Chris T. Ian. And so, you know, after hearing that song, I pretty much envisioned what he would look like in my head. You know, very like vintage, big glasses. You know, typically dresses in stuff like, you know, he has like button-down shirts or polo shirts. Like dresses very, you know, very like business casual, I guess you could say. You know, very like yuppie suburbanite kind of outfits. And just the character is obviously supposed to be exaggerately condescending and thinks he knows better and thinks he knows much more than everybody else when he doesn't do any research for his videos. A lot of the kind of jokes that go into the Chris videos of Chris getting facts wrong or mispronouncing things, a lot of that comes from old reviewer satires that people used to do. Like the one that comes to mind are all the Irate Gamer parodies people used to do. Like when people like Irate Gamer and Game Dude were like at their most popular, you had people like Third Rate Gamer, Irritated Gamer, Save State Gamer, The Game Boob. If Media Wiz started off genuinely inspired by the old Caustic Critic reviewer days, I think Chris T. Ian has gradually become more and more of like a parody of a lot of the stuff that happened in those kind of videos, like a lot of the tropes that show up in there. Which is also, I guess, kind of inspired by like Phalus. Like Phalus would have a bunch of meta jokes that were parodying like reviewer cliches. Also, I guess a little bit of Cinema Snob, like the whole like going into a character and then occasionally making like actual points that the person doing the review genuinely believes. Like Chris, just like the Cinema Snob, is supposed to be an intentionally exaggerated persona. And every once in a while when it's like, I want to have like a moment to actually be serious, I take the glasses off and like give my actual opinions. Another similarity to those two guys are some of the movies that I talk about, like some of the bad Christian movies, Cinema Snobs obviously talked about, and some of the bad animated knockoff movies. Those are definitely from Phalus. I don't think I'm gonna do that many Dingo Pictures movies anymore for Chris, just because, well, Phalus has pretty much talked about every single one of them. I do eventually want to talk about like stuff from Good Times Entertainment and Golden Films, because I haven't seen that many from them, so I'd be curious to like go back and maybe talk about more from them. A lot of the other characters that show up in Chris videos, like Uncle Toby, Mr. Durka, Julia Schwartz, those are definitely inspired by a lot of Rucka Rucka Ali as well. Like the name Mr. Durka and the accent, like the dude man bro, that is definitely from a lot of Rucka songs. And the name Julia Schwartz came from a character that Rucka does for some of his songs, where he has a character named Seymour Schwartz. So I kind of figured like, okay, well, if Seymour Schwartz talks like this, you know, he would probably have a daughter and her name would be Julia Schwartz, and she would talk like this. She's just a good old girl from Long Island. And I mean, Rucka has done songs involving like, you know, redneck stereotypes and French stereotypes. But I feel like a lot of people have done characters like that at some point or another, and that obviously inspired Uncle Toby and Frederic, the French narrator voice. And actually, the reason that the narrator voice always has the stereotypical French accent, that was loosely inspired by SpongeBob. But whereas Tom Kenny actually does a pretty authentic sounding French accent, the joke is that this French narrator voice is just so continuously over the top and oh really ha ha ha. Like Peter Collins, who is slowly becoming one of my favorite characters to do, just because he's pretty much Chris's polar opposite. He's like Chris's arch nemesis in a way. Once again, Peter's voice was inspired by a bit in a Rucka song. Rucka did a song about PETA, and in the song there's a part where he says like, I hate you. And I just thought that was so funny for some reason. So every time I did this character, I just gave him this voice. He's the left-leaning vegan hipster millennial stereotype, and Chris is the sheltered Christian conservative.
And I'm now adding this in later because I totally forgot to bring up Ariel when I was originally recording this. But Ariel started with, a lot of people used to do these text commentary videos where they would respond to a lot of these people doing crappy game reviews, and they would have text pop up on screen, or they'd have like black screens of text responding to whatever was being said in the videos. The one that comes to mind is DL Abawaku, who used to have a series called I Can't Believe It's Not AVGN, and yeah, he usually did videos in this kind of format. So keeping in tune with that whole reviewer satire kind of inspiration for Chris, I thought it would be interesting if it was a review show that actually had text pop up in the middle to correct when the reviewer got something wrong. And over time, Ariel evolved into her own character, and there's the whole thing with her physical form being a plush llama. That was inspired by Chris Raygun, who has a similar character with Paul. And just like with Paul, Ariel's voice switches from video to video, although usually I end up getting my friend Lindsay, Comrade Kitty, to do the voice. But every once in a while I've gotten some other people to do it, like Patrick once did it, Kat once did it, Shannon did it for a video once. So yeah, those are like the real key inspirations behind Ariel Black, and how she pretty much pops up just to correct Chris, or really any of the characters, to point out if they say something stupid or got something wrong.
And once again, speaking of Rucka Rucka Ali, that brings us to MC Swigga. So yeah, MC Swigga was obviously inspired by Rucka Rucka Ali. Like, they're pretty much like Weird Al meets South Park. Like, they're these parody songs that have just a really shocking, edgy, offensive sense of humor to them. The mid-2010 era YouTube, like people like Filthy Frank, H3, iDubbbz, like all that kind of stuff from back in the day. Back when Filthy Frank still did videos. Editing style is very similar to Rucka's in that, like, it's kind of like those old Windows Movie Maker videos where you just get a bunch of pictures off of Google Images and then occasionally sprinkle in like MS Paint level Photoshop stuff in there. But I decided to, try and be upfront about it so that Swigga is Rucka's #1 fan, basically. That's what he considers himself. Constantly looks to him as his inspiration, and talks about how he, considers him the greatest musician of all time. Every once in a while, I'd come up with some ideas for parody songs, or some of my friends would suggest parody songs, and I felt like they were too squeaky clean for Swigga. And I did notice Rucka eventually started doing a thing where every once in a while he does these Weird Al inspired songs under the name Weird Ali Ruckovich. So I was like, I have a bunch of different characters who are obviously supposed to be alternates of each other. Why not do one like that? So the alternate MC Swigga is Weird Al's #1 fan, and coming up with the name was actually surprisingly difficult, but ultimately I landed on Odd Albert Swiggovic. Another big inspiration for Swigga is Video Game Donkey. I think that shows a lot more in the video game reviews that I do as Swigga. But a lot of the editing and a lot of the kind of humor is obviously very Donkey influenced. The gratuitous swearing and the edgy humor thrown in there, and like again very similar to Rucka's editing, like the use of like Photoshop and the stock images. Assholes React. I mean, the name is obviously a parody off of like the Fine Bros React videos, like Kids React, Elders React, stuff like that. I never watched any of those videos, even in middle school, like when they were super popular and blowing up. I never watched them. This is especially interesting to say now with the whole controversy with people like XQC and Sniper Wolf. Reaction channels, the really lazy ones, going back to like when Jinx was the #1 reaction channel. This was back in like 2015, 2016. Like those kind of reaction channels were the original reason I wanted to do Assholes React. It was supposed to parody channels like that. You had React channels, and like I said, you see this nowadays with people like Sniper Wolf, and also these streamers like XQC. What they do is they just watch videos in their entirety, don't say anything, and every once in a while they'll go, oh damn. Anyways, that was the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and comment below what you think. And it's like they add nothing. And lastly, for Swigga, Biased News Network, it seems like it was originally meant to parody, the big news channels on YouTube. You got people like Keemstar and Scarce and Philip DeFranco, and I think before that you had channels like Will of DC and What the Buck Show. Basically just gossip and drama content on YouTube. But I think another inspiration was like, every once in a while, I noticed that channels would have these like segments where they would talk about recent events or talk about like news stories, and series of tubes and Ray Gun Recap and a couple of other ones. They always had to have segments where they talked about like recent stories, and if they were really stupid ones, they make fun of them. So I wanted to do something kind of like that. So BNN, Biased News Network. So the joke would be that, characters who are obviously very opinionated and have stuff to say about the stuff they're talking about, that's why they do it. There was a couple of other inspirations, like What the Fuck Is Wrong With You was kind of an inspiration, because that's a show that talks about like really weird, dumb news stories, and they make fun of the stuff that happens in them. I think the biggest inspiration that I can think of was News Crap, which was a series that Rowdy did, where he would review different like clickbait and dumb news articles that would pop up on stuff like Facebook. Pony Fanboy originally came when me, Critical Kid, and Nostalgia Kid were on Skype, and we all watched a Rucka song called Brony Style, which was a parody of Gangnam Style. And all throughout the song, Rucka does this voice that pretty much led to the inspiration of the Pony Fanboy voice, that, being a brony doesn't really get you tons of chicks. So, like, we just thought that was funny, and we just kept doing it, like, for the rest of the call. And since I was doing the MLP reviews for Media Wiz at the time, Critical Kid was like, hey, you know what? You should make that a character. You should have, like, the stereotypical nerd character and have him be a brony and call him Pony Fanboy. So that's where it came from, basically. And the rest is history. And ever since he pitched that character name, I just had the perfect image of what he would look like. He'd always have MLP shirts and hats. Like, he'd always have like the same My Little Pony like baseball cap or something on. Thick frame glasses. Always has to have like khaki shorts and like tube socks with his sneakers. And pretty much Pony Fanboy is supposed to be like pretty much the opposite of every character on the channel. He's supposed to be the one overly happy character, whereas everybody else has a tendency to be cynical, some more than others. But Pony Fanboy is supposed to be the one happy character who seems to really enjoy talking about what he loves, which is obviously My Little Pony, and spending time with his friends. And over time, the whole thing with Pony Fanboy and creating the Planet Goofball videos, it just came from me taking the little Pony Fanboy drawing that I used for the Pony Fanboy Reads videos that I used to do. I was just kind of messing around with them and like trying out different fandoms that could be applied to, and several of my friends were like, hey, that's pretty cute, like you should do something with that. And so I was like, all right. So then the idea came that what if there was a planet that had this like big convention center getaway resort kind of place, and what if that was like their home planet? And like basically all these different fanboys were supposed to be the same person from different universes. So it's kind of like Rick and Morty did something like that with the Syndicate of Ricks, and I guess kind of Doctor Who-ish in a way. Immediately when I thought of this idea of like other fandoms to work with, there was a bunch of them that came to mind. Like you had stuff like Gravity Falls, Wander Over Yonder, Star Versus, Steven Universe, Rick and Morty, Loud House. There was a bunch of these shows that were getting like really popular at the time. And the other three main fanboys and fangirls, aside from the Pony Fanboy and Fangirl, are obviously PPG, KP, and MLATR, which is Powerpuffs, Kim Possible, and Teenage Robot. Really thinking about it, we had shows like Friendship is Magic before Friendship is Magic was even a thing. And a lot of the people that worked on Friendship is Magic originally came from shows like that. Lauren Faust obviously worked on Powerpuffs, and Rob Renzetti not only worked on Powerpuffs, but he also made Teenage Robot. And even though, I mean, at the time of doing this video, I can't think of anyone from Kim Possible that worked on MLP aside from some voice actors. But that's another example of like, these were shows that even though they were like marketed for tween to teenage girls, like the reason that they were enjoyed by a lot of different demographics is because they were just generally good shows. They had funny writing, they had good action, they had likable characters, they had memorable moments. So I felt like those three in particular were like kind of Pony Fanboy before Pony Fanboy in their own regard. And so I thought it'd be interesting if they were kind of like his friends. They were the ones that wanted to welcome him to Planet Goofball. And then the idea of the fangirls came around because it's like, well, if it's just a planet of fanboys, why not fangirls? And major shout out to my friend Kat, who does the voices for the fangirls. I think she does a great job. She also suggests ideas for episodes, and we usually like spitball ideas off of each other. And I really do like how they come out. I think they're usually really fun to make and put together. And Megacorp, we just thought it was an interesting idea of like, what if all these companies, these like big entertainment companies, were all represented by one individual each, and they all worked for one company. And so Megacorp, the idea for it just basically came from that. Like, what if there was a company where, oh, this person represents Disney, this person represents Warner Brothers, this person represents Universal, this one represents Sony. And from there, like, it was actually really hard to come up with what the Megacorp guys would look like. After several of my friends said that, like, my fanboy fangirl videos were very similar to South Park in that they were, like, you know, intentionally, like, very crudely animated, then it hit me. It's like, well, what if the Megacorp guys were animated like the Canadians in South Park, where they have like the flappy heads and the beady eyes, and instead of like the fanboys and fangirls have high squeaky voices, they have deep mechanical voices. And I'm not sure where exactly the whole corporate robot thing came from, but I think at the time I kept hearing people say that term corporate robot as a way to describe like lifeless entertainers or people who like are just very corporatized and, you know, don't seem to have fun being in the entertainment industry, and they just like crank out things on a regular basis without any passion. And I was like, that's it. That's a good idea. So they look like the Canadians from South Park. They're supposed to be robots, and they're your stereotypical corrupt business people who just keep cranking out things because they believe in quantity over quality. And obviously there's a bunch of different stuff to poke fun at. You have like the streaming service episode where it's all about the streaming service boom. Earlier this year there was the AI art episode, and last year there was the NFT episode. Like, there's always going to be these things that these big companies are doing, so that like there's plenty to satirize with those. So I'm going to end with Water Critic, and this is going to be a weird one because, okay, the general idea with Water Critic is that he's supposed to be a content creator who wants to be famous, but he doesn't really care about what he does. He just kind of hops on trends and hopes that that'll get him famous. And the whole niche of him reviewing water, that came from back in 2015 or 2016. I remember there was this weird trend where a lot of food reviewers who typically, you know, they do reviews of like the latest food items at places like McDonald's or Wendy's, or like the latest limited edition soda drinks or whatever. For some reason in 2015 or 2016, there was some limited edition Fiji water thing, and there was a bunch of these people doing these Fiji water reviews, and like it was so weird to see them like talk about the water and how it tastes, and I'm like, it's water. Like I never got that. Like, they spent most of these videos spent more time talking about the bottle than the actual like water itself. They're just like, oh wow, look at this bottle, it has such a unique aesthetic, it's not rounded, it's actually a square shape. I don't know, I just didn't get it. I just found it so fascinating. So, and then I was like, all right, how about this? That's this guy's thing. He's not a food reviewer. He doesn't review retro video games or old TV shows or movies or anything like that. No, He reviews bottled water. That is his gimmick. However, since then, Water Critic just basically became like the perfect monotone character. Like, he's not cynical. He's kind of like a weird opposite to Pony Fanboy, I guess. Pony Fanboy is the, overly happy one. And Water Critic, he's a blank slate. He has nothing interesting to say. And that's pretty much the whole joke with the character. It's like, he wants to be the next big internet personality, but he doesn't have personality to speak of. Like, he's just so bland and boring, and he doesn't really add anything to the conversation. I can't really think of like any other key inspirations. I guess maybe Elmer from Brandon Rogers' channel. And that's another thing. If you can't tell, a lot of the like comedy, like sketch videos that I do for stuff like Sidekicks and even stuff with like the main characters like Assholes React or BNN, a lot of that is definitely inspired by some of those like old sketch channels that usually had one person playing multiple characters, like Filthy Frank, Brandon Rogers, Dreg. So that does it for this video. I have a couple more videos like this down the pipeline. Obviously, main channel stuff is going to be coming. More Media Wiz, more Blockbuster Show, more Chris T. Ian, Pony Fanboy, MC Swigga, a new Sidekicks episode's coming. Every once in a while, I'm going to try and do videos like this, but they're not gonna be super frequent or anything like that. I'm just gonna do them whenever I can. Just because I've been doing this channel for almost 9 years, and I thought it was something that'd be interesting to talk about, like where all these characters came from exactly.